My father crushes my dreams to protect my younger brother, golden child, and refuses to cover my tuition fees. Later on, I get my sweet revenge. I am 32 years old with a younger brother, 28, and we were both raised by our father, 56. Since middle school, my father has always shown favoritism towards my brother, and over time, I became accustomed to it. I was never the type of son he hoped for, because, unlike him, I had no interest in sports or doing typical manly things. I was always more inclined toward traditionally feminine activities, which is why I was such a mama's boy growing up. I loved everything to do with cooking, reading, and even singing. My father tried to get me to play football with him, but I was terrible at it, so eventually we drifted apart. On the other hand, my brother was exactly what my father wanted. He was tough and fearless, never shying away from getting dirty or hurt. He was the perfect son for my father, and it was clear that my father loved him much more than he loved me. He always praised my brother, but never me. My mother, however, never played favorites. She treated both of us equally, which is one of the reasons I loved her more. I did try to bond with my father and spend time with him, but once we drifted apart, he didn't seem interested in repairing our relationship either. Sadly, the glue that held our fractured family together, my mother, passed away when I was in 8th grade. She had been battling cancer, and by the time we realized, it was too late. She was gone before we could prepare for it. Her passing completely shattered me, and I spiraled into a dark place. My only solace was the kitchen, where I would experiment with new recipes as though my life depended on it. My mother was an exceptional cook, and she often told me that had she not been forced to take over her father's business, she would have pursued a career as a chef. Cooking became the only thing that offered me comfort, especially since my father and brother offered no emotional support during that time. They suppressed their grief, and if anything, grew even more distant. In most families, something like this would have brought everyone closer, but not ours. My obsession with cooking irritated my father, and he constantly nagged me to leave the kitchen and do something more manly. One day, when he had enough, he told me that if he saw me in the kitchen again, he would make me do all the household chores as well. He told me to be more like my brother and man up, which led to a massive argument. I told him that he never loved me, and to my surprise, he admitted it. It was a harsh truth, but at least it was out in the open. After that, I stopped trying to win his approval altogether, and it seemed like he didn't care either. For the next few years, I kept to myself, spending most of my time in my room, listening to music and studying new recipes. I was determined to make a career as a chef, not only for my own sake, but also for my mother. Meanwhile, my father and I only communicated when necessary. My brother didn't care about me either, and he ignored me just as our father did. After my mother passed away, I essentially had no one to rely on. Finally, when it was time to apply for college, I decided to apply to a few top culinary schools, as well as some regular colleges, just to give myself a chance. I didn't know if my father would support me, but I had to try. I had secretly interned at a restaurant that summer and gained some experience, even convincing them to write me a recommendation letter, which helped significantly. As a result, I was accepted into several schools, including one of the best, which just so happened to be in France. I was overjoyed that I was finally getting the chance to pursue my dream, but I was equally anxious since it meant asking my father for permission. I had already decided that I would beg him to let me go if he seemed hesitant, because I couldn't afford to give up on this opportunity. I was determined to make this work no matter what. Eventually, I told my father about the acceptance, fully expecting him to reject my request, claiming it was an unmanly profession. But what I wasn't prepared for was him refusing to pay for my tuition entirely. I was stunned when he told me he wouldn't support my education. It wasn't because he couldn't afford it. He was well off and could easily pay for me to study in France. The reason he refused was because if I went to such a prestigious school, it would make my younger brother feel insecure. My brother was struggling with his grades and couldn't focus, so my father insisted I either go to community college or find a way to pay for my education myself. I was utterly shocked by how cruel he was being. It was hard to believe that a father would crush his child's dreams like this just for the sake of his favorite. After a lot of pleading and crying, when he still refused to change his mind, we had a huge fight, and I said a lot of hurtful things to him before leaving his house for good. I moved in with my maternal aunt, my mother's older sister. The only reason I hadn't moved out earlier was because I found comfort in the house where I had grown up with my mother, and I didn't want to change schools, as my aunt lived far from the high school I attended. I told her everything about my father's refusal to pay for my tuition and that I needed her help. It felt awful asking for money, especially since she wasn't as wealthy as my father, but she reassured me that she would take care of everything. Somehow, she managed to get all of her friends to pitch in, and she sent me to the culinary school of my dreams. I'll forever be grateful to her for that. Once I arrived, I worked part-time to help with my expenses and make the most of my time there. I put in a lot of effort, working tirelessly to ensure that all the money spent on me was worthwhile. I worked extremely hard and eventually became one of the most skilled chefs at the school. Within months of graduating, I landed a job at a high-end French restaurant. I sent half of my salary back to my aunt to repay the money she had spent on me. Slowly but surely, I paid off my debts. I didn't have to rely on a student loan, or perhaps I'd never have been able to pay it off. Anyway, I spent a few years working in France before finally returning home once I had saved enough money to open my own restaurant. It took a couple of years, and in the meantime, I worked as the head chef at another restaurant while keeping my goal of opening my own place in sight. A few weeks ago, everything finally came together, and I was able to open the restaurant I'd worked so hard for. 2 of my friends from my time in France also became co-owners with me. I was grateful when they let me decide the name of the restaurant. They were from the same state as me, so we were all happy to open it in the city I chose. I decided to name it after my mother, a wonderful and unique name in the city we called home. It all seemed to be falling into place. Just a few days ago, we even held a small party for a select group of guests before the official opening. Of course, I invited my aunt and some of her friends who had helped fund my tuition, along with a few old school friends. That was about it. I didn't invite my father or brother for obvious reasons. Even if I had wanted to, I couldn't have, as we hadn't spoken since I left home, and neither of them had bothered to reach out to me. I guess it was better that way, but I should have known they'd show up to latch onto my success one day. And that's exactly what happened. They arrived an hour early, but security didn't stop them since we shared the same last name. They claimed they were there to surprise me, and surprise me they did. When I saw them, I froze. They greeted me as though nothing terrible had ever happened between us, and were warmer towards me than I could ever remember. For the first time in my life, they acted like they genuinely cared. My friends noticed something was off, and after greeting my family politely, they left us alone. I was thankful they could sense my discomfort. Still reeling from the shock, my dad and brother dropped a bombshell by presenting me with a gift, a portrait of my mother. My dad told me he'd commissioned it for me to hang in my restaurant, having heard about the new establishment opening in our city with my name. He said he had always known I had it in me. My brother joined in, praising me and telling me how proud he was. I could hardly believe my ears. Something didn't feel right. I didn't say much, waiting for them to get to the point. I knew they had an ulterior motive. Eventually, they did. Apparently, my brother had become a bartender, all thanks to my dad convincing a friend to give him a job at his club. My brother's grades had been poor throughout school, and he had failed to land a high-paying job, which my dad had always expected from him. Additionally, his lack of effort in high school football games meant he didn't earn a sports scholarship either. Ironically, he ended up at a community college because no one else would accept him. Now, they wanted me to make my brother a partner in the business, despite him doing nothing to deserve it. I had to stop myself from laughing in their faces and instead told them I'd think about it. But I wasn't going to think about it. I just didn't want to turn them away immediately. I had a better plan to humiliate them, and I was ready to execute it. As the party continued, more guests arrived, and eventually everyone we had invited was there. I spent the evening socializing, while my dad and brother did the same, even bragging about me to some people. I marveled at their audacity. Towards the end of the party, it was time for the hosts, me and my partners, to give a toast. My friends spoke first, saving the best for last. When it was my turn, I was ready to speak my truth. I started by thanking all my guests and raised a glass to my mother first, as she was the reason I had been able to achieve so much. I truly believed that her faith in me when I was young made me believe I could do anything, and that belief stayed with me even after she passed. After paying my respects to her, I shifted gears and mentioned how I had to take out a loan from my aunt and her friends to attend culinary school, and I thanked her as well. Then, I got to the point, my family. I spoke about growing up with a father who never loved me, who belittled me for having interests like cooking, and a brother who mirrored everything about my father. I told everyone how my dad refused to pay for my tuition because he feared I'd become more successful than my brother, his golden child. That's why I left home. Despite all the obstacles, I had managed to rise and become who I was. So in a way, they deserved some credit for making me tougher than I ever thought possible. As I spoke, many people shot my dad and brother the dirtiest looks, and even they had the decency to look ashamed, though I knew they didn't truly feel that way. Then, I walked over to my dad and brother and gave them both a hug, putting on the same facade they had earlier. Two could play this game. I announced that because they had come to celebrate my success, I forgave them for the past, and was even willing to offer my brother the job of bartender at my restaurant. To others, it seemed like a heartfelt reconciliation. They even applauded me at the end of my speech, and there were a few whistles. Only my family and I knew the truth. This was all part of my plan to humiliate them. I had managed to succeed quite well, but they had no choice but to grin and pretend to be extremely thankful for what I had done, as they couldn't exactly storm out in fury, which is what they truly wanted to do. Eventually, after the crowd had dispersed and it was time for us to head home, my dad and brother confronted me right outside my restaurant. They were livid, and I swear I could see angry tears in my brother's eyes. They demanded an explanation for what I'd done, and if I had never intended to make my brother a partner, then I should have just sent them away as soon as they arrived. I couldn't help but chuckle and told them this was my way of repaying them for everything they'd put me through over the years. And this was exactly what they deserved. I then walked away, not bothering to glance back, even when I heard my brother sobbing, calling it the cruelest thing he'd ever experienced, and shouting that I'd regret this. But I didn't care, as I was already in my car and driving off. That happened a couple of days ago, and I haven't heard from them since. My aunt thinks I may have gone a bit too far and should have kicked them out at the start, but I disagree. This was well-deserved. Update 1. Hey, I've decided not to reach out to my family to apologize, despite what my aunt said about me being overly harsh. I don't regret what I did, so I'm not going to pretend I do just to appease them. They had the chance to apologize when they came to visit, but they didn't take it. I explained this to my aunt, and while she still believes I shouldn't have done what I did, she hasn't said much else about it. I guess this is just one of those cases where we agree to disagree, and I'm fine with that. In other news, my brother has made sure to badmouth me to all our friends from school behind my back. It's unfortunate that we went to the same high school, as this means random people are now texting me to confirm the rumors that I humiliated and kicked my dad and brother out of my restaurant after feeding them old food on purpose. Yeah, he exaggerated the story to make himself appear as the victim, which doesn't surprise me. Normally, I wouldn't care about petty rumors, but I don't want potential customers believing these lies. So I texted my brother and told him that if he didn't stop spreading false information about me and my restaurant, I'd make sure he loses his job. I hope that works because I really don't have the energy to deal with their unnecessary nonsense right now. I'm too busy with work, and this is just not the time. Update 2, LOL. My brother texted back saying he'll stop only if I make him a partner. I don't even know what level of stupidity and delusion this is, honestly. Besides, if he wants to be a partner, wouldn't it be pretty dumb for him to talk badly about the same restaurant? I'm pretty sure this is my dad's strategy to get his golden boy a high-profile job without actually doing any real work, but it's not going to work with me. I told him if he doesn't stop, he'll be hearing from my lawyers and that he's in no position to negotiate with me. The only reason I haven't done anything yet is because I don't want to get involved in unnecessary drama. But I'll definitely make sure he regrets it if he tries anything funny. This is his last warning, and he better take it seriously. Update 3. So it's been about a month since the last update, and since I've been incredibly busy, I haven't had the chance to fill you all in. My brother did stop spreading lies about me, but they were still desperate to get in on my success. A few weeks ago, my dad showed up with my brother at my house to intimidate me. They came threatening to sue me for using my mother's name for my restaurant and claimed they had already consulted a lawyer. They said if I didn't want any trouble, I needed to make my brother a partner ASAP. Obviously, I immediately called their bluff because no lawyer would take up such a ridiculous case. They seem to have forgotten one very important thing. She was my mother too, not just his wife. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no law stopping me from using her name. By then, I had enough of their nonsense. I told them that if they didn't leave me alone, I'd have no choice but to call the police. My brother lost his temper at that point and tried to grab me by the collar, but luckily my dad held him back. I think it was all the constant humiliation that finally pushed him over the edge. Well, that wasn't my fault, and they were lucky I didn't call the police right then. I told my dad he needed to leave, but he just told my brother to cool off in the car and insisted on speaking with me privately. Once my brother was gone, my dad tried to manipulate me by saying that if my mother knew what I was doing to them, she would be really upset, and I should try to bury the hatchet. At that point, I told him to leave me alone, because even I was at my limit. He couldn't use my mother to manipulate me. That was just low. Honestly, we were far past the point of reconciliation. Neither of them had apologized to me even once, so I couldn't understand why they expected me to forgive them without any effort on their part. As for what my mother would have felt, I'm sure she would have been just as disappointed back when my father refused to pay for my tuition. And for that matter, every single time he made me feel worthless. So he was the last person who should be lecturing me on what she would or wouldn't approve of. I know my mother is proud of me wherever she is, and nothing my dad says will change that. At least my restaurant is thriving, and hopefully I'll be able to expand soon enough.